Hey team, okay, so we're going to continue on with page 2 of the RPA now. And we last time we were talking about how to fill in the first page, which was the offer itself. And now we're going to go on to the terms of the offer on page 2. So you'll notice at the top of page 2, we continue on by entering the property address as well as the date. And then we continue on with sections G, H, I, which is again intentionally left blank, J, K, L, M, N, and O, which again is left blank. So that's what we're going to work on now and in this video. So the first piece of page 2 is section G, which is focusing on more finance pieces, more finance terms, and really, again, it's terms, right? So what is a finance term? It is going to be, are you requesting any seller credits to the buyer? So are you asking the seller to credit you back some money? So you are entitled to ask the seller for anything you want as far as this offer goes. But of course, we got to keep it reasonable if we want them to accept our offer. You're already paying them $500,000, and that's presumably what the house is worth. But sometimes you want the seller to help you pay for some of your closing costs. For example, especially now when we have the situation with the fact that buyer's agents are no longer automatically going to be paid by the sellers, right? The buyer's agents' commissions are now responsible to be paid by the buyer themselves. If you can find a seller who's willing to compensate you and give you a credit so that they will, in a sense, pay for the buyer's agent's commission, that would be the most ideal. And just because they're not automatically paying and offering it on the MLS, it doesn't mean that sellers aren't actually willing to offer this credit or concession, if you will, and or expecting to offer it. So a lot of the times you will want to ask and make sure, even before you're ready to write an offer, hey, I have a buyer's agent. They want to, they're charging me 2.5%. Are you, as the seller, going to be willing to pay that 2.5%? And a lot of the times they will. They might, negotiate a little bit and say they're only willing to pay 2%, and you'll be responsible for the other 0.5%. But, it's definitely a question that you're going to want to ask. Before all of that happened, and even still now, before those changes for the buyer's agents' commissions, buyers would often ask the sellers to help them pay some of their closing costs. I'm a buyer, I have a tight budget, especially if it was a VA buyer using a VA loan. They would often ask the seller to pay some, give some money towards crediting towards their closing costs. And it is a very real possibility that you can get that done. Keep in mind, again, a lot of this reflects on the market, the market of what market you're in. If you are in a seller's market where it's red hot for sellers, that means that there's not a lot of inventory and there is a ton of buyer demand. So that if you walk away, they're still going to have a lot of opportunities to sell their house to a lot of other buyers. They may not be willing to give you so many credits or any credits at all, or pay for your buyer's agent. But if you are in a buyer's market where there's not so much demand and a lot of inventory, then they might be a little bit more desperate for a buyer, and they might be more willing to listen to your requests. Now, if you're also here, you might not have a buyer's agent and you might be doing it yourself. So yeah, maybe it's a good idea to say, hey, I don't need a buyer's agent's commission to be paid for. I just want you to help me with my closing costs, which are going to come out to about 2%. So it's really a deal for you, because normally an agent would cost you about 2.5%. I'm only asking for 2%. So you can definitely ask, again, it probably won't make or break the deal unless they have 6, 7, 10, whatever other offers that are not asking for credits. But you've got to do what you've got to do. What it all comes down when buying a house and putting in an offer is all about you being comfortable with that just as much as the seller is. Because at the end of the day, you're going to be spending this money. You're going to be making these monthly payments. And if you're not comfortable with it, then it's not something that you should move forward with. So if you want to ask for a seller credit, let's say it's for the agent's commission, you're going to check this box. And you can write in 2.5%. Actually, sorry, this is a dollar amount. So in this case, 2.5% of 500,000 would be 12,500, and that would be 2.5%. Now, however, while you can do this and you can ask for it this way, if you are asking for the help to pay for a buyer's agent, you're actually going to check this box. And it says seller agrees to pay the obligation of the buyer to compensate the buyer's broker under a separate agreement. This was changed, again, because of the changes in the industry. And usually what I would write in is seller to pay for buyer agent commission as per SPBB, because that's the form SPBB. And this way it just alerts to them that you've actually checked this box here. Otherwise, you can ask them, to pay for your closing costs at 2%, which would be $10,000, right? And you can say credits to be applied to any and all closing costs. Something along those lines. Up to you. Now, typically, seller credit will be applied to closing costs, or it can be applied to something else. Maybe you have a credit card bill that you have to pay off, and it's $10,000, and you wanted to apply towards that before it applies to your closing costs. So you can write that in. It's completely up to you how you're going to use the credits, as long as the seller agrees to it. So we already talked about all of these G items, and now we're going to move on to H very quickly. H is talking about verification of proof of funds. So when you're making an offer, the seller needs to know that you actually have the money to pay them for this purchase. If you are making an all cash offer, they need to see a bank account with all of the cash in that bank account. It can be one account, it can be 6 accounts with your name on it, but as long as you're showing them that you actually have this money, that's what they need to see. If you are making an all cash offer, you would use 5B. If you are making an offer with a loan, you would use 6A and 6B, which is the verification of down payment and closing costs and the verification of a loan application. So you would get a loan application approval, right? It's called a pre-approval. We've talked about that. And that letter would say that you are eligible to get the loan for $400,000. Well, they need to see that letter saying that you now have a loan approval for $400,000. So you need to send that in and attach it to this offer in the email that you're sending. But what about that extra $100,000? Remember the $15,000 and the $85,000? You need to show them that you have that money for the down payment and the closing costs. Another probably $10,000 in this case. Usually it's about 2 to 3% of the purchase price. So you need to show them the bank statement that shows $110,000 to $115,000. So you need to attach those to the email as well. And usually it is attached with the email. If you need an extra couple of days because you need to get the letter updated or something like that, or you need to pull a more recent bank statement because you don't have one that's within the last 30 days, then you can ask for it to be sent for 3 days after acceptance, right? But normally they're not going to accept it unless they have seen it. When you do attach the loan application, you're going to check the box. Is it a pre-qualification, the first stage? Is it a pre-approval, the second stage? Or is a fully underwritten pre-approval, which is less likely to have happened? Usually the underwriting process happens once you're in contract. You would check the appropriate box and move on. Final verification of condition. This is the walkthrough that you're going to be able to do to make sure that the house is still in good standing, because you haven't seen it in about 10 days or so since the inspection period. And if there were repairs made, you need to check on those repairs. You want to maybe make sure that when they moved out, they didn't damage a whole bunch of things. So usually it's within 5 days prior to close of escrow. So that's pretty standard. Usually it's not much earlier than that, and you don't want to make it much later than that either. Assignment request. Again, this isn't going to be something that you're going to probably be needing. The assignment request is if you are going to get this under contract and then assign the contract to some other buyer who's going to take over for you. Since it's not something that you are going to likely be needing, we're not going to talk about that much. It is discussed, however, in the higher ticket course. And then we move on to section L. Section L is contingencies. And this is what we spoke about earlier. You are putting down a $15,000 deposit to tell the seller that you are serious about moving forward and purchasing the house. And you should be serious about purchasing this house when you are writing this offer. But because it is a buyer beware situation, and because it is the fact that you are buying this house as is, you still need to do some due diligence to make sure that when you're putting in this offer after having seen it for maybe a total of 15 minutes, that everything you understand to be true about the house is in fact true. And everything you understand to be true about your loan application being pre-approved will actually be approved. And that the value of the home is close to what other people would pay for it. Your $500,000 is what other people would pay for it. And that's why the lender needs to get an appraisal to make sure if they have to foreclose on you, that they can then sell it for close to that $500,000 and get their money back. So we need a contingency period to be able to check on all of these things. So the first contingency period is for the loan. And this is usually the longest contingency period. So the loan contingency period is meant only to verify that the loan gets approved. The only purpose for this loan contingency is if the loan gets denied, you can then use the contingency clause to cancel the contract and get your $15,000 back. That's the only reason you can use the loan contingency, no other reason. If you want it to be for 17 days, that's standard. If you want it to be more, you can. That's a weaker offer. If you want it to be less, you can. That's a little bit of a stronger offer. It's entirely up to you as to how many days you want to make the offer for. But when it comes to the loan and the appraisal contingency, I would highly recommend asking the lender how much time they think they need for you to have those contingencies in place. You want to at least have conditional approval, is what it's called with the lender, where they are just running through a few final conditions to check off some boxes, but they've pretty much underwritten the entire file at that point, and they know that you're good to go. So barring some unforeseen circumstance, you should be fine. Usually a condition is getting a letter from the employer, getting a more recent bank statement. You can ask what conditions are still left to be approved at that conditional approval, but you want to make sure you have at least conditional approval, if not a clear to close status when you remove the loan contingency. Double check with the lender before you put in a time frame for when the loan contingency should be removed. But it is up to you how strong or weak you want that offer to be. Also, you can check with the seller to see if they are in a particular rush as well. The appraisal is similar to the loan contingency, as that is only useful for an appraisal, meaning that if the appraisal falls short of the value if the appraisal value falls short of the purchase price, then you can use the appraisal contingency to get out of the contract and get your money back. It cannot be used for anything else but the appraisal. So the appraisal 99.9% of the time should probably come back at the exact purchase price, but it does every once in a while come back either higher, which is great for you as the buyer, or lower, which is not very good for you as the buyer. And in that case, you're either going to want to negotiate with the seller to see if you can adjust the purchase price to maybe the appraised value or maybe somewhere in between. But anywhere above the bank is only going to fund the purchase for up to the appraised value. So if the appraised value in this case came into $480,000, the bank will only fund it as if the purchase price was $480,000, which means you now owe another $20,000 on top of your 20% down payment for $480,000. So you definitely need to make sure that it's a situation where if the seller is not going to be negotiable to a lower value and a lower purchase price because of that appraisal, you have that appraisal contingency to exit the contract. If you did not want to put your contract in with either of these contingencies, because first of all, if you had a cash offer, you don't need these contingencies. You don't have a loan, and therefore you don't need an appraisal because the appraisal is typically required by a lender. Or you just don't care. You're willing to roll the dice. You're willing to let go of this $15,000 if the loan gets denied or the appraisal falls short and you can't cover the difference. You can make your offer really strong by checking these boxes and saying you don't want a loan contingency or an appraisal contingency. And keep in mind, if you are using a VA loan or an FHA loan, you are going to be required to sign a form called the FVAC, which essentially is an appraisal contingency in its own rights. It's separate from the appraisal contingency, but it basically says that you can cancel the contract if the appraised value falls shorter than the purchase price. So you have that as backup anyways if you did remove your appraisal contingency. Usually I will put 14 days for a loan contingency and 12 days for an appraisal contingency, but I will always check with the lender and see what the market timeline are for appraisal these days when I'm putting in an offer. An investigation of property is the rest of these disclosures with the exception of the last one. So L3 through 8 is your inspection contingency, your inspection period. Okay. Now, if you were going to remove any of these contingencies, you would have to do it on the contingency removal form. That's CRB, and you would attach it, click this, attach that form, and check off the ones you're removing. But let's go through them one by one. Now that we've understood the loan and appraisal, you have a contingency for the investigation of the property, the physical inspection. You have a contingency for insurance, for a review of the seller documents, meaning the documents that they're sending to you with all the disclosures and all the material facts and everything like that they want you to know about the property. You can get out of the contract if you see something in these documents that you don't like. You can get out of the contract if you don't get insurance that's going to fit your budget. You can get out of the contract if you see something on the title report that you don't like. Common interest disclosures is pertaining to the HOA bylaws, or the financials of the HOA, or the meeting minutes, whatever they send you for the HOA disclosures, you can get out of the contract for that purpose. And the review of leased or liened items. Let's say they have solar panels. Here you go. Solar panels or propane tanks or maybe a water softener, anything that you're going to be required to take over as a lease or a lien on the property that they can't get rid of, then you get to review these. And if you don't like any of this stuff, you can exit the contract and get your money back. In fact, L3 to L8, it's sort of what we call no questions asked. You are allowed to exit the contract within your inspection contingency period for any reason you really want and get out of the contract if it's something you're seeing that you're not liking. I will usually put down 10 for all of these. So 10, 10, 10, 10, 10, and 10. Here, it's pretty safe to do that. It's plenty of time. Again, it makes it a stronger offer than leaving it for 17. And of course, I could change one of them differently. For example, the HOA contingency, I'll usually make it the same as the loan contingency because those two are very closely tied, as the lender needs to sign off on the HOA documents as well as you do. So yeah, you can make them any which way you want. Again, this is for physical inspection. This is just to get informational access to the property, the right to go to the property to do your investigations. It is not a contingency itself, but you do have to have rights to go there, and that this is the part of the contract that gives you those rights. Okay, and then you have the investigation, you have the insurance, getting insurance for the property, seller documents, title report, the HOA contingency, and the review of lease or lien items. And this is the sale of the buyer's property, which you would have to check this box and fill out this other COP form. Again, we cover this in the higher ticket course. This is if you were selling your property first before you can buy this one. So you already own a house, and before you are able to afford this purchase, you actually have to sell your house first. This form goes into the details of where you are on that process of selling. Is it already listed? Is it already in escrow? Have you not even started the process? And if you have that sale contingency, beware, the seller might not look as favorably on your offer if you have that, because then they're going to have to wait, and it's not a certainty that you're moving forward with this contract. Okay, Section M, time of possession. When do you get the keys? Well, usually it's upon notice of recordation. So as soon as the county records it, do you get the keys? Or you can make it a specific time and day after recording. It doesn't have to be any particular time. It doesn't have to be any particular day, but it has to be done after the recording. So make sure you keep that in mind if you are choosing a different day. Seller occupied or vacant units. So if the seller is still in the house and you're ready to move in, or if the units are vacant but it is occupied, when are you going to be able to move in? When I say vacant but occupied, I mean their stuff is still there. So you can check this box if it's going to be you've worked back an agreement with the seller that they can stay a few days later than recording. Usually that's what's referred to as a lease back, is if you give them a time to get out, a time period to get out, maybe 5 days after recording. So you can put in 5 days after recording. That's when you have to get out, and that's when I get the keys. And there is another form for that if it's 29 days or fewer. If it's more than 29 days, if it's 30 days or more, you would check this box, you would write in the number of days, and you'd actually have to sign a lease with the seller because you are becoming a landlord at that point, and they're going to have to pay you rent or whatever terms are that you're going to work out on the RLAS form, but you are going to have to work that stuff out with them and understand, how that impacts you and your ability to move in, or kick them out also if they do not move out. And lastly, the occupied units by tenants. So somebody other than the seller is living in this property. Well, we've got to fill out yet another form for that. And in that case, if somebody is in that property other than the seller, tenants, or just their cousin or anything like that, then you have to fill out this tenant occupied property addendum, TOPA, and that is the form you fill out here. Just going back for a quick second on these contingencies, something to quickly point out. These contingencies in a lot of different states will magically just disappear after the time frames that you put in here. So after 14 days, the loan contingency's up no matter what. It's gone. If you haven't gotten your conditional approval, if you haven't gotten your appraisal back in 12 days, if you didn't do your full investigation or get your insurance after these 10 days, doesn't matter. Time period's up. If you haven't negotiated for a longer contingency, they are gone. And that $15,000, that is now what we refer to as hard money. And the seller is now able to keep that money if you do cancel the contract. But in California, we require that the buyer removes these loan contingencies. There is a form, I mentioned it here, a contingency removal form, that when these 10 days are up, you have to sign a form saying, I hereby remove them. When these 12 days are up, I hereby remove the appraisal contingency. When these 14 days are up, I hereby remove the loan contingency. And if you do not remove these contingencies in the time periods in which you already contractually agreed to, then the seller can send you what's called a notice to perform, and you then have 2 days to remove it. And if you don't do it by then and only then is the seller allowed to cancel the contract unilaterally on you. And you would still get your money back if you had these contingencies in place, but you'd have the contract being canceled on you. So that's just an important thing to note. And then we have the document and delivery, documents, fees, and compliance delivery, the time for performance. So this is section N. Section N, so seller delivery of documents. So you want to learn what these documents are and referring to, go see section 14A. But again, it is the documents in which they have to provide to you for your inspection period. Right? We discussed that. The review of seller documents, you have 10 days to review it. Well, if they're only going to provide it in 7 days, it's going to make it tough. Now, keep in mind, you actually have 5 days from the date of the last delivery of the document before your contingencies are due. So if they gave it to you on day 7, you actually now get 12 days for this contingency. Okay, but I usually make this 3. Then to sign and return the escrow holder provisions and instructions at the bottom of this contract, the escrow holder has to send you back the last page signed and a photocopy of that. 5 days is fine. It's really no rush. We just have to get it before the close of escrow. The time to pay fees for ordering HOA documents. I always make this 1 day. Why? Because I have to get these documents. I can't wait for you to wait 3 days because HOAs are notoriously slow in getting these documents. So if it's first going to take you 3 days to order them, then it's going to take them another week to get them. That's already 10 days. It's really cutting it close for me if I only have 14. So I'm going to ask you ordering it from day 1. Installing smoke alarms and CO detectors and water heating bracing. That's fine, as long as they're in there when I move in. I don't care if you leave them as 7 days. And then evidence of representative authority. So if somebody is selling a house to you because they are the trustees of a trust where the person died, or they are overseeing a probate situation that the owner is no longer alive, and they're selling it on the owner's behalf for any reason, they have to actually show you the evidence that they are the representative and they have authority to sign on behalf of the seller. So that's 3 days. You don't change that. That's just part of the contract. And again, you would initial at the bottom of this page. And now we have completed the terms. So don't forget, the more you are in favor of the seller, the stronger your offer. The more you are favor in you, the weaker the offer. But you want to find something that is going to be strong enough, that is going to be, especially when it comes to these credits, something that's strong enough that works for the seller and weak enough that it makes you comfortable as well. So hopefully that makes some sense. And of course, we always have the weekly calls if you have any questions about your particular issues, but that's how you would fill out page 2 of the RPA agreement.